and advocates. We have Julia, Carmen, Sam, and Vanessa. How are you all this evening?
Good, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Good evening.
I'm very excited for each of you to be here with me tonight. This is such an important topic as we try to think about creating an equitable world where everyone can achieve their best. And having this conversation is so important right now. I first want to start with just understanding how you got into the work for this field. Support for neurodiverse students is really important, but it's also often overlooked or misunderstood. I know each of you had your own journey into this topic and learning more and gaining your passion for working with students. Julia, I want to start with you. What was your first entry into working with neurodiverse students?
Sure. So my entry into working with neurodiverse students really started with being inspired by a book that I read. And this book was by Oliver Sacks, a book called Seeing Voices, where there were, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life at this point. And I read this book, which was talking about the deaf culture. And there were parents of a deaf child who were speaking about how influential their daughter was on their perspective of the world. They talked about how beautiful it was to watch her sign and how just watching their daughter tell a story in sign language taught them how to see the world in a whole new different way. So I was kind of inspired by that and decided, wow, I kind of want to get into that world. And how beautiful is that you could see totally the world in a totally different way just by seeing through somebody else's eyes or getting a different perspective. And so from there, I started seeking out experiences working with neurodiverse individuals. I went to Peru that summer and worked in an orphanage for people who have children with disabilities and who were rejected from their homes and put into an orphanage because of that. And I just got really inspired. And from there, I just entered into, into that world. So I've been doing it ever since.
Julia, what I love about your story is just that there was one moment that sort of was eye-opening for you and created it allowed you to ask new questions about what the world could be if you looked at it differently. Vanessa, I know that you also have worked directly with students, have really been impacted by that work. Where did your journey start?
So I started quite by accident. I was looking for a job and I happened to apply for a place that was a day program for adults with disabilities. So it did vocational training and was just like an everyday program to reinforce skills. And I got the job and I have been doing it for 20 years now. So I tried to stray once and go into a different field and I was back within 3 months. So it's just something that calls to my heart and feels right. So it was quite by accident, but what a lovely little accident it was for me. And I continue to do it to this day.
What a lovely little accident is like one of my favorite quotes, Vanessa, of the night. Sam, I feel like you have a different story because actually you were not by accident. You were very intentional about the learning that you had to do and why. So can you tell us a little bit about where your background comes from?
Yeah, I come at this from learning disability. I'm fairly intelligent and well-read and all that, and I can read just fine, just don't get me to write. The letters will come out in all kinds of different orders. I can have trouble with spelling a 4-letter word, even at this day. But it was a torture for a child. And what I eventually discovered is that the actual act of writing was in the way. And now that I have keyboards, I've gotten myself a couple of advanced degrees. But at the time, I couldn't write a page of material. My memory would go away. It was incredibly frustrating as a child. And I'm old enough that this wasn't a thing yet. Learning disabilities were either you could barely function in the world or you were a student. That was about all that was there. But me, I was functioning fine until you put a pencil in my hand and I tried to write, and then everything fell apart. And really mostly all they had for me was try harder, or worse. I was punished in every way you can imagine because you just should learn how to spell, son. And that didn't go very well. But eventually my mother, who was a school teacher, decided to, she was doing with first grade kids. She realized this was coming along. There were other kids, and she ended up being one of the early teachers who was in learning disabilities for kids. And they began to realize oh, you don't force the kid to work on their weaknesses, you pitch to their strengths. And that changes everything. And as I learned as I got older to not fight with my disabilities, but to use my strengths, I excelled.
As I hear Sam's story, Carmen, I think a lot about the work that you do in helping students excel and helping them find their next step. How did you come into this space?
Well, I actually started off working with young people in a choir that was organized by the New York City Housing Authority. I spent 20 years working with these young people from all different developments from all over the city. And in that, we've had several students participating that had various disabilities. So we were a very diverse group. We also had all of those artists that kind of were looking for a space. And so we developed a community. And I found that it was very impactful to have our students participate and also express themselves. They finally had an opportunity to feel accepted, and they were able to express themselves as artists. But then we also supported them in many ways with work-based learning opportunities, insight to the music industry. And, you know, it was just a great way also for them to stand as mentors for each other. And so, you know, 20 years later, I found myself then working for the Department of Education in the same capacity somewhat, where we're helping students transition to post-secondary life and options, yeah.
Thank you, Carmen. For anyone just joining us, we are having discussion on neurodiversity in education and how we can break down barriers. One of the things that I heard as each of you were speaking was something I want to touch on for anyone in the audience who actually might be coming at this still at their early stages of learning and growing and having their eyes open. And that's that neurodiversity actually covers a really wide set of attributes, and it's a very large spectrum. So before we move any further in this conversation, I would love to hear each of you talk a little bit about like how you have come to understand the neurodiverse spectrum and ways in which everyone can be aware of all the different types of individuals that term entails. Sam, I'm actually going to start with you because I know that this is something you think about a lot in terms of how neurodiversity has impacted your career and academic cycle.
It's enormously impactful because of just trying to function in the world, and trying to write a paper, write an essay and all that. And before I understood what was going on, then I got a computer and everything changed. I started being able to actually produce. But in my own, I do adult education, mostly of skills and meditation and things like that. And what I've come to see is no two humans are the same. That's the trick of it, is to suddenly realize we're all utterly unique with a unique pattern of skills and capacities and disabilities, strengths and weaknesses within the full range of our ability to absorb sensory data. And what happens is some people get really canalized and some people are very broad. So my best way of learning is visual. Give me a book, I can read it, and then I can virtually recite it to you. Talk to me for 5 minutes, it's gone in 5 minutes later. and my late wife was exactly the opposite, which made for good patterns. She could remember anything said for decades, and she was a brilliant psychotherapist because of that, but she couldn't remember what happened in a room that she just left. So each of those kinds of things. So that made me very sensitive to the richness whenever teaching, and trying to tease out of people, well, where is this working for you? Where is it not? And how many people are unconscious of how they learn? These are enormous challenges when facing this.
Vanessa, from your perspective, I know you've worked with a range of students with a range of abilities. How have you seen the spectrum of neurodiversity play out in your work?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, especially in the field of education. In terms of Sam was speaking, I do feel like when someone hears a specific diagnosis, they go and associate or they give it a definition. So I could have 6 students who are on the autism spectrum, and not one student is going to be alike. There might be threads that are interwoven that have similarities. There might be something in my tool chest from other years that might apply, but every year, every student that walks in is different despite having the same diagnosis. And that, it took me a few years to really realize, like, yeah, there's no size, there's no fits all. And I mean, I feel bad sometimes when there's certain avenues that people think are appropriate to teach with or to do behavior modification with. And once you're, with kids every day, all day, and you see, like, yeah, sure, that sounds great, but I have a unique individual whose needs are met in a completely different way. And a lot of it is, observing and stepping back and seeing with, like, maybe, let the kids show you, like, they might not have a voice to tell you, or they might not know how to put it to words. But there's motivation behind all behavior, and the student's trying to show you. So instead of kind of giving them a formulaic, but this is what the books say, I find a lot of stepping back from the academic knowledge and just kind of observing and letting the students guide me, has been helpful personally in trying to identify and address a myriad of different abilities.
Carmen, I saw you nodding while Vanessa was speaking. How does that sort of notion of there's not a one size fits all solution or understanding of neurodiversity, how has that come up for you in your work?
Now in my work, we find that through transition consultancies that we have one-on-one with a student or with their parents, we find, in going through their plan with their IEPs, we're understanding what their goals are. And by the time they arrive at our office, they have a little bit better of an idea. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, of what they'd like to pursue next. And we really do take the time, whether it's by survey or by conversation or interacting with them in our work-based learning programs. We kind of experience with them as they discover more about themselves and their strengths, which they may have thought wasn't a strength. We're able to kind of help them outside of the classroom setting. It's almost like this bridge that gets them to sort of like awaken to maybe some things about themselves they didn't know before. And it lends to something I learned very early on in my career teaching music, is that there's more than one way to teach the same piece of music. And if you listen and pay attention long enough and connect with, what you're observing from the student, you're able to, really give the person the opportunity that they need. It's more of an equity situation where they will get there by having the supports that they need. So when they come to TCAC, we provide those work-based learning opportunities, but we're also a resource, connection to resources. So it really just helped sharpen me to be able to listen to someone, learn from someone, and then if we don't have immediately available to us what the student would need for their next step, we're readily able to connect them to that and make suggestions. Yeah.
As each of you are speaking, I was hearing this really important notion, which is shifting to a model where you're listening to students, building education around students, and allowing students to grow into their own strengths. But the term shifting indicates that, like, the current model of education and success does not actually do that naturally. Julia, I see you nodding. So can you talk a little bit about just like, how do you have to incorporate that flexibility and adaptability in a way that is different than what educational norms are currently requiring of students?
Absolutely. So I come from a background of working with students who have severe and complex special needs. So the students that I work with are all nonverbal students. The majority of our students are non-ambulatory. And I just think a lot about, this conversation has made me think a lot about how even in the academics, even in the curricula that are available right now, my whole group of learners at my school are pretty much left out of that conversation. And there's not really a lot of available resources when it comes towards educating our students. So for example, there's only a handful of researchers even looking into how to support learners who have severe and complex special needs. So, learners who have multiple diagnoses that are interacting with each other. So it's not as straightforward as, nothing's straightforward, everybody's unique. And, but, it's just a more complex case for our students. And there's really nothing out there that I feel really speaks towards my students that I work with in academics and curriculum. Our teachers at our school are constantly having to reinvent the wheel and create our own lessons because there's not anything out there that we could find that really suits our learners. And so when I think about how important it is to shift our education system to meet the needs of students, neurodiverse students, I think about how we even need to start with some neurodiverse students. So we need a place to start, like a shift where we're beginning to think about some of these learners.
Sam, I want to get your thoughts here because on top of the challenges of just finding curriculum and material that fits the needs of neurodiverse students at different stages of the spectrum, I think that's probably even harder when you are a student in a school or class that is not designed for your needs at all. I know that's experience that you went through. So what were maybe some of the misconceptions about your capabilities that you ran into during your schooling? And how did you start to learn to navigate those?
Mostly badly. I'm too early. It wasn't really until high school until they started testing me thoroughly enough to actually start sorting it out. They could see that I was having trouble, but I could go into a lecture, I could learn the material, I could discourse on it, and then it would came time to writing on it. And by high school and such, all the emotional challenge that would build up around that. So a lot of that was just because I was always being forced into the output methods of the school. There were no choices given. When I finally got into grad school, I'm at the University of Chicago. I'm taking one of the qualification exams, which I blow horribly. But the main problem was that the only way the exam could be taken was by Blue Book. And I'm pretty sure 20 years later, 30 years later, that was in the 90s, that was 90. If I went to the University of Chicago now and I said, hi, this is my problem, they'd say, well, just sit on the machine over there and we'll just make sure it's in good shape. But they couldn't even think of how to respond to me. So what I would say in turning the question the other way around, the problem is kind of an industrial factory-like attitude towards education. And you see this in early education in particular. We're going to grind these kids through this and they'll all be great. But that's presuming children are cogs. Children are raw material that's homogeneous. We ain't raw material. We are richly conditioned and there's a whole lot going on for us. And if you pitch to our strengths, it'll be great. If you don't, it's going to go badly. And for the most part, for me, it went pretty badly.
Thank you, Sam, for sharing that. I would say based on all the interactions I've had with you, I know it took a lot of work, but I think it's going really well because you were brilliant and amazing to work with. Vanessa, on this notion of pitching to strengths, one thing that I think can be really challenging, so you earlier mentioned the being careful that not letting a diagnosis, using diagnosis as a tool for understanding, but not letting it be prescriptive in how you view students and their outcomes. One thing that can be challenging, especially if people don't have the information, the awareness, is to know how to be flexible and let someone reach their strengths, but not actually let biases creep in that make you lower the bar in a way that isn't productive, right? To say like, I'm going to teach you their strengths. I don't know what those are, so I'm just going to be I'm going to lower the bar a little bit and maybe not expect as much. I know that you have worked really hard to find the right level of rigor for your students and to challenge them. How have you learned to strike the balance of teaching to strengths, but still being open to what students can accomplish?
That's a really good question. It's taken years of practice. And I think you'll hear all educators say it starts with assessment. And as we're approaching this panel, I was thinking about like what Sam was saying is that we do treat education as this sort of like children show up, we do this, we do that, we do A, B, and C, we have time for this, we don't have time for that. And assessment is a big part of finding where our students fit into the day, to the schedule. But also, like Julia said, there aren't materials that are fit for our students. So it takes a lot of creativity, a lot of things that you wouldn't think you need to access as an educator, to still expect, yet give space. I don't know if that's the best way to say it. But like, I like to sometimes sit back and observe. My first 2 months of school, I like to try to tell families that this is our period together. This is we're assessing each other. If I'm not coming across in a way that's approachable, or, I'm not going to discover that strength, I'm still going to give the same work to everybody and adapt it. Like Sam was saying, I was so thankful to hear you speak, because I had a student who has really difficult time writing. And I said, what, I think there might be an option. Why don't we try a keyboard? So it's also listening to other educators, and saying, okay, I have this student displaying these things. I really think that there's more that they can do, but I'm not quite sure how to access the information that they can give me. So for me, really finding out how to do that is sitting with my coworkers and going through their years of experience and pulling from that. And it's a lot of trial and error, which I do understand people might think like, oh, you're not doing the academic rigor. But I also don't want to torture the poor child into saying, you have to, because this says I have to do it. So it's a lot of flexibility, and observation.
As we think about assessment and student needs, one thing that occurs to me that we haven't talked about yet is how needs can change over time. So as a student who is getting support in grade 5, how their needs might look in grade 8, and then in grade 12 and beyond. Carmen, I know that you've been working with an older student group. What are some of the things that you think about when you're providing support to them and helping them navigate sort of the career readiness that you work with them on?
Yes, definitely. We are wrapping up our senior week at the DOE, and along with that, TCAC has offered quite a few workshops and informational sessions. And the ones that have been the most popular, I will say, are around independent living. So students are now interested in, and these are mostly focused on the seniors, but underclassmen I'm sure will be have been in attendance. But independent living, travel training. I can't wait, Miss Ramon, till my travel training is complete and I can have my job, because I can't wait to have my own apartment. Or I saw the video on the college tour, but I can't wait to go there myself, because I want to become XYZ. Which is a little different from when they're a little bit younger. So we serve students from 14 to 21. And so at the beginning, there may be some more focus on job readiness and, career exploration, some work-based learning, activities where they'll learn a little bit more about, what the work environment is, how to interview. We do mock interviews. And then there's that point, where it's decision day, or where we're going to apply. And we're also receiving a lot of positive feedback about when we discuss disclosing your disability when you move on to college, because that doesn't go with you. It's built in school right now. Everyone knows your IEP follows you, but there's a difference when you step into that college environment. You're gonna definitely benefit if you disclose your disability, and there are so much more supports and opportunities for you from that point. So from what Sam said earlier, I can definitely relate to what he was saying about there's so much out there now, even though there may be room for another shift moving forward.
One of the things, as all of you are speaking, that stands out to me as a person who works in education as well, is lots of the core skills we're discussing are skills that are just good for education, right? And it's easy to view the needs of neurodiverse students as this really hard thing to learn. And there are things to learn that are hard, but the notion of being flexible, creating benchmarks that are rigorous but are realistic for students and help inspire joy, helping students find tools to do work in ways that work for them, being willing to adapt to new things. These all sound like the kinds of things that we need to create great classrooms for all students, but would also benefit neurodiverse students. One thing I want to circle back on that we've touched on a little bit, and Julia, I'll start with you, is we've noted that there are things that just don't feel built for the students that we work with. And I would love to know more about what's the work that you do to navigate that challenge if the resources available to you are not naturally set up to support your students.
Sure. So, just starting with before your question, what you were talking about, that there's so much that we can do that's just good practice all around. And I think universal design for learning is really about that. It's removing barriers for neurodiverse students that also are helpful for every student, and help every student kind of engage in a more meaningful way. And I also think that education has started this shift. You see the shift towards social emotional learning is seeing the whole student and addressing the needs of the whole student. So, this is what special education has always been doing, is seeing the whole student and being able to address the needs. And it's just a young, like Sam was saying, that wasn't the practice back when he was in school, but now that's becoming more and more of the norm, which makes me hopeful for the future. But I think that, right now, the students that I'm working with don't have access to the resources and accommodations that they would need in their public schools. And that's why they're placed at our private special education school. And we are making really, really simple changes to the environment, to modify the environment, that I don't see why it would be unreasonable to do that in a public school setting. So for example, a lot of the students that I work with have CVI or cortical visual impairment, which something that helps with students who have CVI is simply lighting up materials brighter. So using a desk lamp to light up the materials on their desk and having a black background, making things a little bit less visually complex. I don't really see why that can't be done in a public school general education classroom so that those students can be with their peers in their neighborhood schools. I think that there has been a shift towards more of this whole child approach, and I'm excited to see where that goes in our lifetime, because we've already made strides and still there's so much more we can do. But a lot of these things and modifications we can make are pretty simple.
One of those strides, I think, is probably tied to the use of technology, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. Sam, listening to you speak, it sounds like technology unlocked barriers for you. I also know technology probably still has a long way to go. Vanessa, from your experience, what have been the benefits and also maybe obstacles in leveraging technology to support your students in new ways?
Yeah, so when I was in the classroom, technology, especially for our nonverbal students, was huge. There are programs that have been developed that really help students find their voice. They're amazing. They're quite complicated. And I think an important lesson for me was when I would see a student who people might have thought belonged somewhere in terms of their cognitive ability, and then we would see them master this really complex technology. You had to stop and say, like, "Ooh, I think I might have to look at things a little differently." So technology definitely expands our mindset to what the student has access to and what they can communicate back to us. And I know just when I met you and we were talking about technology, there's like also the flip side of life during the pandemic, where technology has become both our friend and one of the biggest challenges out there right now, because students who do have the communication devices, it's hard to use them from home because they're hard to operate. It's hard for an adult to learn all of the different icons. And so, I mean, technology definitely has been a game changer once the adults figure out how to use it. I think that's like the biggest part. The kids have it. But there's also, I find a drawback in when I'm in person, I don't like to reinforce with technology because I feel like it's motivating on a very different level to some people as well. So I'm not going to encourage you to finish your assignment so that you can play a game on an iPad. Like I value more of, being able to touch and feel and experience. So I think in our day and age, technology is a reward sometimes for any young person. So having it have shifted from being a thing of pleasure to having to sit and listen to my teacher, it's gone from being useful in the classroom to sometimes being a little bit of an impediment now that we're all technology.
Vanessa has touched on something that I think is so key, and that is that the last year and change at this point has not been normal at all. It's been incredibly challenging. Specifically, it's been challenging for families with children and navigating education and navigating remote learning. There's been so many conversations around learning loss, around the concerns around access to technology, parents' ability to work and support their kids, parents navigating going back to work in person while their kids are still at home. And even in that conversation, the burden and additional challenges of families who have other considerations actually doesn't come to the forefront. So I want to make sure we spend time on that today, because I can only imagine all the things that you had to do and your families had to do to support students in this remote space. Carmen, can you talk to us a little bit about just what it took to even make your program function in a remote environment?
Yes, definitely. There were so many factors at play. We had to stop and end our work-based learning program, only to turn around and reinstate it as a remote work-based learning program, which never existed before in models or in the past. And we were able to do so in about a week and a half. My colleagues are amazing and very creative, and we worked very hard to ensure that the students not only had the work-based learning opportunity, but for our program, this one in particular was top, it actually provides a stipend. And so during this time, there were so many families not working, and there were so many people in that flux of like adjusting to what this was going to be. We wanted to do our very best to ensure that the students still learned what they needed to learn about the work-based learning experiences, but also, ensuring that their stipends were being processed. They were, they were vital to just their household, making it through the next step. And being able to do so through technology initially was a challenge. There were just environment that they were not used to, having that learning experience. So there were, dishes being washed and other family members, other siblings trying to learn right beside them. And you can hear the class of the third grade class going on while we're, and then there were some students that really did not have a great experience initially, to the point of frustration. And I would actually say, like depression. There were some students that were having some really negative thoughts and about, even harming themselves. And when it came to our attention, we had to, immediately notify who we needed to notify, but also connect them to a resource that would maybe help them. And now in our recent program that's currently wrapping, actually tomorrow's the last day, it is the top program, which we ran fully remote this year. And we have some amazing outcomes. There's a student internship opportunity with the program Dream, where they actually developed a journal about themselves using Canva as a platform. And they are so intricate in the details and the way the students introduce themselves. They're now pros at this. And I feel like it sort of lends to the idea of the world that this generation of students is going to inherit needs to sort of not be introduced to them on their first day of the job. This should be something that maybe they've encountered in their school setting at some point. as well. So I saw both, negative and also a lot of positive.
Julia, I see you smiling and nodding, and I know that this resonates with you in terms of just the challenges to access, the challenges to routine, but then also some of those like amazing aha moments once you turned a corner. How did this play out for your students, and what was that moment where it started to feel possible when you started to see some positive outcomes along with the challenges that you were navigating?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Carmen, we had our group of educators here at our school flip our school from being fully in person to fully remote in just a week and a half. I think most people everywhere had that experience. And at first, everybody at our school was thinking, how is this going to happen? This is impossible. And I'll say that there were a lot of students where it was close to impossible, for the family, because of the family's ability to access the online stuff that we were doing. However, the families that were able to access online education, we were able to teach as teachers, we were able to teach the parents and the caretakers and the families a lot of what we do here at school and a lot of the skills that their students had that they might not even have known about. So, something that's so beneficial to our students is when they're able to generalize skills across different settings. So not just showing me this particular skill in the classroom, but can you show it to me down the hall? Can you show it to me in the community? Can you show it to me, in your household? And so being able to provide instruction for the families via Zoom, Google Meets, whatever it was really meaningful, because that meant that we were able to work on the same skills but have the students in a different setting. And I think one of the aha moments was, we can teach the parents too, we can teach the caretakers too. So I know that a lot of staff members felt really awkward telling parents what to do with their kid when the students started at home. The teachers were noticing the parent is giving too many prompts to the student. They're saying like, answer it too quickly. But then we were able to step in and say, oh, actually, Carmen, your daughter can, if you give your daughter 30 seconds where you're kind of quiet after I ask the question, that can help. And so the aha moment was realizing that the parents and caretakers needed help too. They don't always know exactly how to work with their child, even if they're the person that knows their child better than anybody in the world, So I think that was the aha moment, was we can work as a team in order to, give our students the same opportunities they get in school in a different environment. But that's not to say there were no challenges, because there were also plenty of challenges, including the ability for families to even log on in the first place.
Vanessa and Carmen, I see you both off mute and excited to engage. So Vanessa, we'll start with you.
Sure. I actually just wanted to share something that could never have happened in the classroom that happened today during remote learning. And a mother had been asking me something about her son's speech. She said he keeps saying things opposite. And I said, I haven't noticed it. I don't really, I'll keep an eye out. And then today he was logging off and she and I were discussing something, and it happened and I got to see it and we got to discuss it, which is so rare. And, you could just almost see the like, oh my God, I'd like the relief that she felt of like, you saw it, you understand what I'm talking about. And for me to be like, oh, okay, I think I might try something, and we'll try this together. We'll talk to the speech therapist. Now that I understand what you're talking about, cool. I'm excited to try to figure this out. And, she left smiling. It was like one of those days where we just left feeling good. And it is something that, you don't get to do that often during the school year when you're not with the parent every day. I mean, this woman's, she's with me every day. And today I finally was able to hear her and say like, all right, cool, we can do this, we got it. So there is a unique learning opportunity there for sure.
Carmen, how is facilitating relationships with parents and getting them engaged played out in your work?
It has changed in a positive way. TCAC offers a professional learning catalog that supports students, but there's also a series of workshops that will support parents as well as educators, and also the community-based organizations. And so along with the rest of our programs, we had to reconfigure all of that for the online experience. And we were finding out that some parents were frustrated with the technology, realizing if this was going to be a long-term quarantine, would their children, fall behind or receive the services and support that they need. So, I mean, we ended up learning as we went, obviously, building the plane as we flew the plane. So for American Sign Language interpreters, we realized at one point there were students in 2 different virtual classrooms, needed the same support. We make the adjustment and have everybody coordinate. Applications for SYEP. Parents had never tried to complete a PDF online, and there was initially a lot of sort of pushback as far as, I think my student will apply, without outside of DOE with another organization, but it just really was because they didn't have that support. So we were also able to begin to have connections directly with parents, ongoing first name basis of parents that we probably would have never seen actually walk into, our center. Because we're centrally located in one school building in the Bronx, and we serve all of the Bronx, or every TCAC in every borough has that same setup. So it was just wonderful. Now we have those direct contacts with the parents, and we're making sort of like breakthroughs. And so they recognize this immediately, and we have some great feedback and from some of our work-based learning programs as a result.
I think this notion of that it truly is a team effort, that there's all the work that teachers can do, but parents and the household have a huge component, rings true, I think, for lots of students, right? I think sometimes we forget that students have these internal lives where they're getting different cues and different pressures and different expectations, but it's particularly important in this space. Sam, I know that you had a mother who really lured into this space, but I think there are probably parents who, again, to what we were talking about earlier, are still learning how to be the best advocate and support system for their students. If there was one thing that you've learned through your mom's support and your own growth that you would recommend that a parent keep in mind, what would that be?
Never say try harder. That scars me. The reaction in my heart when anyone says that is nearly violent because of the way I was tortured with that. I was trying my hardest. So trying to wow, you're trying hard. Maybe there's an easier way to do this would have been a better approach. Maybe a real recognition that, okay, this is hard. Maybe hard is not good. We come from a culture informed by the Protestant work ethic that says hard is good, try harder. The Buddhists say, ooh, this is hard for you. Why are you doing it? Stop. Totally different reaction. Same process. They will tell you to stop. Let's see what we're doing different, what we should do differently for you. And of course, the Buddha said, there are 84,000 methods of achieving enlightenment. We've got one for you. Don't worry about it. We can do this. And maybe that's what we need to do with education, is to realize, no, there are 84,000 ways of learning this. If this channel isn't working for you, let's get another channel. If I get you noticing about this person who gets into this computer software and is absorbing it, learning it, and putting it to powerful use. I've seen too many kids do this to not spot that. But the idea of, oh, this is, no, okay, let's get you away from that. Let's find the tool that you will use. Oh, look, they're excelling over here. Again, it comes back to pitching to people's strengths. And that's the hardest thing, I think, is to shift away from the mentality of fixing the bad, but staying with the strengths and learning how this person will excel over everyone in that particular environment. My way of talking this when I'm confronted with it is to say, you don't play catch with a kid who doesn't have arms. You go out and you play football, soccer, and get your tail whipped, because they're going to be really good at this and they're going to run you in circles, but that's going to be fun for the kid. That's the job. But you don't play catch with them, because it'll just be frustrating for everybody.
And Sam, I think on top of the connection to teaching to strengths and supporting strengths, there's also just the connection to shifting what we think success is. Because I think for parents, and I'm sure for teachers who are not skilled in this, you're almost worried about, I think Carmen, to the thing you said, is my student going to fall behind? Like, are they not meeting their benchmarks? Are they not succeeding? What happens when they age out of this program? What happens when I can't take care of them? And so, I mean, Julia and Vanessa, you both have shared, while maybe not hearing parents say, try harder, the sort of the pressuring of the cues, like the time, the time that you would give students. Vanessa, how have you helped some of your families navigate just like what is also a really stressful time for them emotionally when they're navigating all of these changes and also worried about their student?
So it's exactly something that was most important is exactly what Julia said. There was one day where I remember I just said, there's this magic little thing called wait time. And that means we let somebody speak, and I want you to count in your head, start to 15, because it might feel uncomfortable, but let's just do it. Let me ask the question before we say anything, count to 15 in your head, and then let's see what happens. And it was nice to see she was a young mother and she was struggling, and it was a suggestion that I think especially educators in this field take for granted, that that sometimes any person needs to wait. If I'm bombarded with questions, I'm going to start to put them all together in my head as one and be like, wait a minute, what did you ask me again? So that was one of the main things that, like, then across all of our online times together, I would try. It doesn't always work, to encourage, to be like, okay, let's just like wait a little bit. And not everybody's in there for it. It's not comfortable. But I would say of all the little ways, and I don't know how many times I've said, you're doing so well, to the parent. The student, they get that from me every other minute, but the parent would get on the screen and just look exasperated. And I would say, I hear the 3 other classes that your kids are going to in the background. I know getting your daughter on right now isn't easy. So thank you. Like, sure, she got on late, but she got on, you tried, you're doing what we're all doing right now. And that is our best. So, thank you. And she was like, what? I was like, that's it. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you for showing up and for trying, because it's what we're all doing right now. So I feel like a lesson learned too, many lessons this year, is to thank the families, to let them know that they're an important part of the team. We need them.
Yes, Julia.
Yeah, I do think that that's so true, is just giving the parents the validation, the reinforcement for everything they're doing. And then also consistently providing messages of like really specific things that their child did that you were impressed by. So, like if you see a parent who isn't appreciating everything that their child is doing, then it's really important for you to model for the parents, this is what I'm seeing, so that they can start to open their eyes and see that different perspective. And I think that we, another piece is we as educators, we don't walk in the same shoes in many instances as the parents do. So I think also emphasizing, hey, I don't have your point of view. Can you share that with me? And then you don't have mine, so I'll share that with you. So I think that this time of remote learning has, I think Vanessa was talking about, this is something that never would have happened in school. You typically didn't have the parent right there where you can talk about something on the spot. And now that's the beauty, is you can provide reinforcement to the parents. You can say, hey, I just saw Natisha do this one thing so specifically, and the parent was right there to witness it with you. So there's no doubt. So I think that that's really important, is modeling, how you see the student, and then helping the parent be able to access that perspective as well.
One of the things that we're talking about that I want to give space to is, this has been an emotionally hard time in a field that probably already requires a lot of emotional intention and intelligence. I know, Carmen, you mentioned going through a period of time where you had students that you were really worried about in terms of how they were navigating this time. What are the ways in which you apply sort of an emotional, vulnerable, and intelligent lens to the work you do with your students? And also, how are you taking care of yourself? Because I know that the work that is being asked of you is not easy. Carmen, I will start with you.
Definitely, thank you. I think that's such an important question. We have definitely internally, for the TCAC staff and in the Bronx in particular, our team meetings, we're doing check-ins. How are you? And this is not that superficial. How are you? We know there's a lot going on. We may have, had a moment where we lost contact with a student and we didn't think they were going to continue in a program. And, so there's plus on top of that, there's a pandemic and people can't get to their loved ones. And we are wondering, if, what if someone's going to be okay that we're thinking about, and we can't get to them and we can't just go over and check on them. The same situation is also happening, at home. And we've had series of, well, they might seem, formal in description, but we've had open office hours. We'll set up time for to have conversations with families, and definitely, staying on that example that I gave earlier with that one student who was really in a depressed state, follow up, even if it's an uncomfortable situation. And the parent ended up being very open with us and letting us know the status of their child and that all is well, and thanking us for working with them. So I just think it's always important to understand. I'm not sure, Vanessa or Julia, who said this, but it's really about, or maybe you both spoke on this a bit, we're in this together and we're all trying to figure it out, and we're all doing the best we can, and that's okay. And tomorrow we get to try again. And if there's a new thing that we can use to help us get there, that's wonderful, but we'll still all be in it together and we'll be there for each other. And it might sound a little cliche, but it really started to function that way. How is so-and-so doing with XYZ? Do they need help with their, parents were trying to figure out how to get working papers for their student, or for their child, and Social Security card applications, and these offices are shut down, like the government was shut down, and they thought that this would be a missed opportunity for their family. So I think it's just so important to have that ear of understanding and patience, and maybe even just showing them that you can relate in the smallest ways, and being consistent and always available.
Carmen, as I listen to you speak about just the work that it takes to create this space that is emotionally supportive, Sam, I think about all of the sort of learnings that you've had in starting in this space when there was no framework, when there was less education, and building a lot of your own mechanisms in how you approach the world. Looking ahead, knowing that we're making strides, I want to ask you, and I will ask the others, what if you could paint with a magical brush and create an educational experience that actually felt inclusive and actually felt supportive of students, what does that look like to you? How do we get there from your perspective?
Full sensory immersion. I mean, really, it's like, how many channels can I throw at this person, group of people? In how many different ways can I speak to them? Can I get any smells in the air? Can I get, whatever, textures? What can I do to bring this to ground, to bring it to the flesh in all the different ways that a person actually learns? Because of course, whatever our main channel is, we're using the other ones, and some of them are really reinforcing. There are certain things I remember by their texture or by their smell or their curvature of them that's more real to me than anything visual or auditory. And I know other people do the same stuff. So how do I get that to them? Really challenging when we're trying to do it through a wire. I mean, there lies the problem. I mean, and here then it becomes the matter of, like, okay, I have this limited capacity. How do I enrich this the most? Can I make this more interactive than just our talkie? Drawing pictures, like we're getting these whiteboardy type things getting going. And for me, it's really important to be drawing stuff and big circles and arrows and all this kind of stuff. And my teaching is something of a dance. It's a performance. It's fully with my body, partly for this reason, because even the people in the seats, they're starting to react to me moving because I'm moving, and bring all that to it because it makes it alive. And in the very least, I'm living what I'm teaching at that moment. I'm fully engaged in it. There is nothing else there, just that thought, that idea. And everything I can use to bring to it, I'm trying to deliver that to those who are actively interested in doing so. So the richness of the experience is full sensory, all the tools we can bring to bear. And so fill up the room with that, and they'll soak in the ones that work for them.
Vanessa, I saw you do like jazz hands as Sam was speaking. So I'd love to ask you this question. What does the future look like to you in a world where we're building experiences that are inclusive and accessible to all students?
For me, the jazz hands was just hearing say sensory inclusivity. You know, if I imagine in my head the beautiful school that is wanting to let all students have access, we have a lot more outdoor time. We have time to touch, to feel, to get up and move, and to use our bodies more. It's just, yeah, like I think of it, it almost seems like a dream. But to like just see different rooms offering different opportunities instead of being a replica of each, you know, like we have space to incorporate different sensory activities into one classroom. But for neurodiverse people, sometimes having to meet that need while you have other noises, other things going on around you, can be very difficult, and that doesn't help emotional modulation. So, you know, having an area like, oh, well, we have this space where maybe music is soothing, or, you know, just having more opportunities to meet needs that can and help neurodiverse people not stay on that one. You know, we're not on one wire. We have many different pathways. And I would love to offer that in many different modalities.
I think, again, thinking of the term Julia used, this all comes back to universal design, which is the thing that you just described, Vanessa, the thing you just described, Sam, sounds like something that's really awesome for neurodiverse students. It also sounds like something that's really awesome for students who just have a range of needs. And as we said earlier, every single person has different needs, different ways of learning, different ways of engaging. And how great would it be to have the world that Vanessa, you just painted for us? That said, that full landscape photo that we just painted is like a lot of steps, and that can feel very overwhelming when there are current barriers. So in our last few minutes, which is like the saddest sentence I've said all this week, I'm so sad that our time is ending. I would love for each of you to share the one thing that you would like our audience to take away to move toward that world, that it is more inclusive and it is more accessible. Julia, I'm going to start with you.
Wow, putting me on the spot. One takeaway, there's so many. I think one takeaway is it's something that Sam said, there's 84,000 ways to enlightenment. And I just love that. That stuck with me the rest of the presentation. Is I think that's the takeaway is that there's so many ways to get to the same end goal. And you know, it's all about playing towards individuals' strengths in order to get there, and see which of those 84,000 ways is going to get you to where you want to be. So I think that's really what I'm taking away, at least. So thank you, Sam, for inspiring that.
Carmen.
I think that sort of putting yourself in a space to sort of recalibrate your expectations. You expect too much or too little, or just realizing that you're on a path, and that, you know, what will be in the next step is what you have in the next step. Take all that you know with you, and, you know, keep positive in that support. And then it might actually help to not only recalibrate your expectations, but maybe your passion. And then that will be where you're like at your purest. So what you just said, what you're best at, you know, will be able to be accessible to you, because you're not worried about all those other entities. What's expected of you, or am I doing too much, or am I doing too little?
Thank you, Carmen. Sam.
I would remind people to come back to zero, to stop. One of the things that we've got to know is the listening part of this. There's a lot of different ways of listening, but most of them require shutting up in here and stopping. I've learned most from the moments I've stopped and really paid attention to a person put myself into quiet and receptive and really listen. And that can be at a person or just in a room, and trusting what is coming up, because there's so much depth in here that's not anywhere near my conscious awareness. But by stillness, I keep coming back to what's immediate and important. And I find that's when I can best deliver.
Thank you, Sam. And last but definitely not least, Vanessa.
I wish I could like take all of those thoughts and bring it together. I would always just say leading with openness. Going back to the very first thing of like, we can't all fit somebody one peg in a hole. There's 84,000 pathways. There's so much that if we try to fit everybody into one mold, our job's not going to be any easier, and we're going to have a whole group of a lot of unhappy children. So, let yourselves be open. That's all I can hope for.
I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your thoughts. As I leave here tonight, and all of you for joining us, I am inspired by the opportunities that we have ahead of us. I'm inspired by our ability to both build a world that helps students who need us to be there for them succeed, but then also allows us to help every single student achieve more. I think that world is a world that is kinder, that is more successful, and that allows everyone to thrive in a way that is tailored to their strengths. And I thank you all for sharing your thoughts on how we get there. I hope everyone here has a great evening, and we will be continuing this conversation down the future. Thank you all and have a good night.